Hi there, Kaya. My name is Hasib Riaz, and my pronouns are he, him, and I am lucky enough to be one of the co-founders of Man Up. Before I get into a little bit about what we do and where we've come to this year, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm able to record this video from, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that this land was stolen and sovereignty was never ceded. It's a privilege that we get to do our work throughout the Indigenous lands of WA and predominantly on Whadjuk Noongar Budja, and I would like to acknowledge that this land was stolen and sovereignty was never ceded. This was and always will be Aboriginal land. So a little bit about Man Up. We are an organisation that started in 2020, May 2020, and we started, myself and Gareth, the other co-founder, both went to private boys' high schools in Perth. And our experiences in these high schools weren't necessarily the most positive. We were in environments where we were kind of conditioned to follow a pack mentality. We didn't really have any kind of individuality in what we did, and a lot of the behaviours that we'd learnt and things that we practiced were quite negative. For Gareth, that kind of showed itself in quite poor mental health outcomes, and he had quite a tumultuous early relationship where him and his partner didn't have the most positive communication styles, and it led him to having quite poor and negative coping mechanisms as a young man until he was able to talk about it with some other people. For myself personally, it's about the idea of knowing that we as young men weren't having the most positive impact on three key parties in our environment. The first being ourselves. As young men, we didn't really have the ability to look into ourselves and recognize what our own mental health looked like. The second being our friends. We kind of just adopted the behaviors that we'd learnt from older generations and never questioned them, and normally they were quite poor in their outcome. And the last one being female and non-binary people in our community. I think the height of poor masculine behavior is sexual assault and sexual violence. And essentially me and Gareth came together and were like, how can we work in this space to change some of the things that young men learn? And we thought that the best way to do that would be at around the year 10 age, when people are old enough to understand and grapple the concepts, and then young enough where they still haven't fully formed their ideas. And we wanted to work to engage with young men at a peer-to-peer level, being young men ourselves, talking about our experiences being fresh out of high school. Along came the idea of Man Up and doing this in small group workshops. So essentially we run 3 workshops with young men around the state. The first being a culture session where we talk about the idea of having a supportive group of young male friends and how to make that the most positive learning environment possible, and how that can turn negative, and also how to recognize poor influences on male behavior in our society, such as porn, and also call out culture and what to do with your friends if they are acting inappropriately or behaving inappropriately. The second workshop is a relationships workshop where we talk about healthy relationships, what they look like, how to identify if they're unhealthy, and then also do a core element of our content on sexual consent as well. And finally, our third workshop, which is coping, where we talk about mental health, preventative mental health strategies for young men, and then also reactive mental health strategies, how to talk about your emotions, why it's important, how to recognize poor mental health outcomes in young men. Since our inception, we've had some challenges in terms of getting set up as an organisation can always be difficult, and also working with similar organisations that are all trying to do the best thing for gender equity in our society through working with young men. For us, we really focus on the peer-to-peer space. That's our area of focus and strength, is working with young men, being young men ourselves, and that's how our content is developed, and also our style of communication that we have with young boys as well. In terms of recent highlights, we've been really lucky enough to have a really strong, large, diverse committee as well, which is now 17 to 18 members big, with people from all realms of educational background and diverse backgrounds, and young men who are really passionate about similar things, and also see the impact that Man Up has had on the actual volunteering community themselves. It's led us to being lucky enough and privileged enough to have been recognised for a couple of awards. We were winners of the 7News State Award for Small Group Achievement a couple of years ago, and have been nominated for the Aqua Awards, and also were recently nominated and won the Community Excellence Service Awards as well this year. in terms of goals for the future, we're always looking to expand our operations, especially into rural areas where the need to discuss men's mental health and masculinity is much higher, and also where those ideas of toxic masculinity. So what essentially that means is stereotypical masculine traits that are pushed too far. So they're stereotypical masculine traits aren't bad. It's okay to be brave and strong and courageous, but when it's the only ideology that you have, that's what we call, it becomes toxic when it ferments. And that seems to show itself more in rural communities where we want to do more of our work. So in the future, we hope to go out to the Pilbara and the Kimberley, and also expand our services to work with diverse young men with backgrounds that might be homeless, young men that have come from broken homes, Indigenous young men, culturally and linguistically diverse young men as well, as part of our future work. And also to look to expand our operations to other states and see where information and workshops like this might be useful. And also to see how our content can be integrated into curriculum and providing the best possible masculinity-based education for young men in schools and in high schools as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach us on our Facebook or our Instagram, where you can find us there. And you can also email our team at team@manupwa.org.au. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen. And we look forward to engaging and hearing from you soon. Take care.
I certainly understand what Haseeb was saying with the culture around private boys' schools. I also attended a private boys' school, and the culture there was very sexist, racist, homophobic, and that was normal. Coming out of there, going into a tertiary education environment where you're meeting people from all different walks of life, you leave that echo chamber and it hits you like a truck. And you realise the impact that you're having on these people around you, especially the women and the non-binary people in your community, specifically the people of colour that you're interacting with, and gender diverse people, and the whole range of things that you weren't exposed to in that really, I suppose, confined environment. So that was kind of one side as to why I joined, is realising the education that I didn't have and how wrong I was in my approach to living my life. And that was a bit of a slow burn. And then with that came a more abrupt sign that I needed to do something, which was when a friend of mine unfortunately attempted to take his own life. We were 6 hours before out having a drink. And I got a call from his parents saying, "Do you want to come to the hospital? He's in a coma, may not live, you may need to come and kind of say your goodbyes." So that was a real wake-up call, saying, you've been through all of this hyper-masculine culture where you're emphasising these, as Haseeb said, traditionally masculine views that turn toxic when you're embraced by them and you can't break away from them. And then, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I had a few friends that were doing this charity that had just started, and they're telling me about, they're hoping to get into schools one day. And it just kind of came at a time where life was telling me something needed to happen. And then this opportunity came along, and I just thought, this is what needs to be in place. If I had this kind of education, potentially a lot of this really terrible stuff could be avoided.
That's so interesting. And what I'm hearing is that, like, your realization was around, like, when you finally got out of high school, kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
And that's this similar experience to Haseeb and whatnot. And I can even back that up, because I went to a private school myself, and as soon as I got into uni, I just realized how much I missed out on and how much I was trying to conform into a specific box.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Anton?
So I went to like a co-ed school, like public school, but somewhat similar as well. Definitely had like my own issues with mental health and like sort of negotiating my own relationship with masculinity, like what I think it means to be a man and so on. And so that's something I think I like grappled with a bit, and being like it's predominantly raised by women. So like I think I have some feminine characteristics, and like maybe at points in my life I was making less of myself because of that. And so yeah, just negotiating that relationship, that was a big thing for me. And then I think that's a lot of what we do at Man Up, right? Sort of looking at these traits, like masculine and feminine, and being like, oh yeah, it's not a bad thing to be like mixing this, right? And yeah, I think that's sort of similarity. That was a big thing that clicked with me. And then as well, the focus on mental health. It's a big thing that I sort of like found important in my life. And yeah, so I think that's what I found interesting about that up, and that's why I sort of got involved. And then as I've gotten involved, I've just grown to love it more and more. And yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's an awesome journey. Like just kind of figuring out and being able to like accept yourself more, and like I guess like the whole thing about being a man isn't exactly in one box. It's extremely diverse with so many different characteristics and whatnot. Yeah, I was looking at your social media pages. And I found it really interesting because you guys do a lot of work on there. Like I was looking at the Facebook page and whatnot, and there was so much engagement in terms of like the type of posts that you make. And one of them that's stood out to me was your volunteers of the month. Yeah, so that was really interesting. I found that really cool because what you guys essentially did was you guys are kind of like familiarizing your audience with your volunteers, the work that you do, as well as bringing it down to like kind of a youth engagement platform where you ask questions that are typically quite familiar to young people. Like one of them that I got was part of all these like questions, which was what and how and why did you join Man Up? What's your favorite item that you bought for under $100? And then one of them was what's your most used emoji? Yeah, so in terms of that, I find that so interesting. Did you want to speak on that in terms of like engaging your volunteers and your audience?
Yeah, sorry, do you want me to address the camera? Or...
It was whichever.
And we'll open it up to the floor shortly.
Yeah.
I suppose the philosophy behind the Volunteer of the Month posts comes on two fronts. First, we want to really promote the fact that we have a really rich volunteer culture, and it's more than just volunteering at a charity. It's a lifestyle, and it's a community, and it's a group of friends that just want to do better in the world rather than a chore or a job. The second front is probably a little more meaningful in the sense that when we go to schools, the nature of our content is that we can't really present more than once per session, per cohort.
Yeah.
They'd be getting the same lesson, and it just wouldn't really be, any extra added benefit. What we do have though is a lot of students following our social media after the sessions, and what we're trying to do with the Volunteer of the Month posts and all of our social media content is show that the learning doesn't just stop after the workshop. It's an entire attitude and approach towards yourself, how you present your masculinity towards others and the community in general, to show that we've come in and we've done this workshop, but you can continue on, be a part of a bigger community that is supportive of each other, supportive of themselves, reflective, critical in their thinking about themselves, considerate in the way that they approach their relationships and the wider people that they interact with. So yeah, it's on one hand about supporting our volunteers and making sure that we're showing a bit of appreciation for them, but also showing that the students that we work with, it doesn't just stop after that 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. It is, it's a whole, lifelong journey of learning and bettering yourself.
Yeah, I guess it really inspires the students that you do teach to volunteer after high school.
And we have had that, yeah.
That's awesome.
In fact, some of our best volunteers and most committed volunteers are those that have gone through our program in year 11 and 12 and then joined us after.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's awesome. Did you have any questions, mate?
Oh, I actually was thinking if there were any questions from particularly people who work in the regions, because I know that that's an area that you that was mentioned that you want to expand out into the regions.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, what does that look like for the regions for you to expand? Does that mean that you offer the program in schools in different regions? Does that mean that it's a face-to-face? Is it something that you do online? Is it what does that look like for people that might be interested out in the regions?
Comfortable, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we go on rural trips. We go to the different regions and just visit schools in like youth or community centres there. So we've gone up to Geraldton, Jurien Bay, previously. Got the trip coming up to the Wheatbelt, Kalgoorlie as well. Gone down to Tanning, Bunbury, Esperance. These are all areas we visited and plan on visiting in the future. And so yeah, we'll just go speak to young boys, usually year 6 or 7 onwards, in schools, and yeah.
And you work on need, like so someone approaches you and says, we've heard about your program, we'd love you to come to us, like is that how it works or?
Yeah, there's a bit of that, and there's also what we'll do is we'll plan a certain trip, be like these are the times we'll be in a specific area, and we'll just email schools in those areas and say, this is going to be here, if you'd be interested in having us down, come down, and yeah, come down. And also we subsidise sessions based off it's gear scores, yeah. So 50% or even fully subsidised for some schools. So yeah.
Our goal ultimately is to have all schools subsidised forever for every session. No matter what socioeconomic background, we want to provide this service for free. It's just a matter of balancing, costs versus, the services that we can provide.
Yeah.
At the moment, rural trips especially,
Yeah.
we run most rural trips at a complete non-profit, I suppose.
Yeah.
The nature of rural schools is that most of them fall below that 20th percentile. Is everyone familiar with the ICSEA ranking?
Yeah.
So it's a score that is given to every school in Australia. And it essentially takes into account, the socioeconomic backgrounds of the families, how long kids travel to get to the school, how far away access to services are, the teaching quality, the educational outcomes, the behavioural surveys, all of that in one number that essentially just encompasses how advantaged or disadvantaged a school is. For our subsidy framework, any school that is in the bottom 20% will get free sessions, regardless of rural trip or metro. Any school that is in the 30th to 20th percent will get 50% off. That is just, I suppose, a measure for now, because our session revenue is about 40% of our revenue at the moment. And rural trips especially, we want to subsidise fully, but they're about 40% of our annual running costs. So it was tough making a cutoff to say, at this point you actually don't qualify. But that is a temporary measure, and yeah, we'd love to approach every single school and say this service is free forever for as many students as you want.
That's an awesome way to kind of be equitable in a way. Yeah.
What about students that don't engage with school? So you've got maybe you've got some youth programs and that where they're trying to actually engage young people who don't go to school. Do you ever do any work with those groups?
Yeah, so on our rural trips, we visit youth centres and resource centres as well, try and engage students outside of that school environment. Often we'll do evening sessions with them as well, at a time where students are less likely to leave that school because it is different to that educational environment. And we're very conscious of that, and we want to make sure that all students from all areas have access to this education. And students don't attend school for a number of reasons. We're conscious of that, and we don't want to simply go to schools and nowhere else to either force kids into that school environment when they don't want to be there, or simply dismiss the kids that probably need it more than the ones that are at the school. We do occasionally do that with metro sessions as well. We've just run a whole workshop suite with Medalla, and that's been a raging success. We really loved our time there, and we got some great feedback. And yeah, we're actually meeting with a couple of different umbrella organisations, I suppose you'd call them, in a couple of weeks to talk about their partner rural centres and try and get some more engagement in our future rural trips with the, I suppose, extracurricular, extra school centres, so we can reach more kids here.
And do you have any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander volunteers?
At the moment, no. We've been really struggling with general volunteer uptake, and then even more so with Indigenous volunteers. We have in the past, but they've either become too old. So part of our kind of volunteering framework is that you have to be within 10 years of graduating high school to volunteer. That is so that you can, when you're going to schools and speaking to kids, relate to what issues they're actually experiencing. That was one of the biggest pitfalls that we received when we were getting education in schools about these kind of topics, was that it's someone who graduated high school in the 70s or 80s, and they just don't understand
No.
what it's like to be a student today. So we have had previous volunteers. That being said, there's not many, and we are desperately recruiting for Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander volunteers. We are, trying to chase any contact. So if anyone here has any links or contacts or suggestions to how we might be able to recruit more volunteers in general, but especially Indigenous volunteers, we'd be all ears, absolutely.
So is there anybody got any questions out there or comments or anything to add? No. Okay. Is Ian?
Yeah, hi guys, great presentation and good job you're doing, obviously. Just wondered what the age group would be, how young and how old, and did you have any mature people in the group as well, just like a father image, or is that not to go?
Speak to them.
Yeah, so the boys we usually see kids from about year 7 to up to year 12. They mainly years 9 to 11, the 8 to 11 maybe for the most part. I think we've seen some kids in year 5 and 6, and certainly we do want to see more kids that are a bit younger and develop content that's appropriate for them regarding like puberty and manhood. And then regarding, I think our oldest volunteers are about like 26. Yeah, she's Gareth, I believe. Drew. Yeah. So
yep.
Yeah, so that's within 10 years of graduating high school, that's like what age our volunteers are, and I think that'd be interesting as well. Sure.
Yeah, and then in terms of engaging, I suppose, mature students, in the past we've been really focused. So, like Hasib said, we've only really been running for 3.5 years, and in that time we've had a real whirlwind of trying to develop our content for our target audience. Now that that's a little bit more established, we are trying to branch into older audiences. That's going to look at kind of two main audiences. The first one is going into teachers and talking to the teachers about what we present and also how they can facilitate change after we've left. So upskilling them in what it's like to be a student today, explaining some of the kind of, I suppose, niche complexities of current masculinity. How is masculinity influenced by things like social media and online echo chambers, and how is a male student who's 12 seeing something that's totally different to their female counterparts and seeing something that's totally different to their 16-year-old brother. So explaining a little bit of that, doing some case studies on, I suppose, some social media icons, some people that students may look up to for good and bad reasons, and explaining how they can have a healthy conversation around that without just discouraging students from, opening up and talking to them in the future. The other thing that we're going to be branching into is more corporate education, and that will be targeted at both explaining how adults themselves grapple their masculinity and how we present that. But we do understand that that's a different ballgame to talking to students, because adults have come to terms with their own masculinity. They've already defined it and been living with it for decades. So it's not really our place to come in and tell someone how to present their own gender identity. So the other option that we're looking at, and it's probably going to be the one we move down, is talking about what issues are your sons, your nephews, your students engaging with today. Similar to the presentation, we'd be talking about how are the young men in your community experiencing masculinity, and what can you do to help them be healthier men. It's addressing the same content. It's coming from a lens of, we're not telling you to change, we're just helping you provide a better future for the young men in your lives.
That's sort of, thanks for that, that's excellent. And I thought you actually touched on the next question, if I can double up with a follow-up. Obviously you have a challenge, and I'm just wondering what barriers you're facing when you get to the schools, like maybe the teachers feel like that's their job or something, and just wonder how what sort of brick walls you hit.
Yeah, so there's a couple of big barriers. The first one would obviously be competitor organisations trying to vie for the same spot within schools. There's one in particular called Tomorrow Man. They operate out of the eastern states. but they have run operations here in Western Australia before. Our kind of big, I suppose, point of competition is that we're the only charity in Australia since early 2022 that runs strictly peer-to-peer education services. So that is the point that we made before, that none of us are older than 10 years out of high school. No other organisation can pride themselves on that. And we are particularly, I suppose, proud of the fact that we have a unique lens in which we can write content and present it, because we truly understand, probably better than everyone except for the students themselves, what they're going to, because we were in that position, less than a decade ago. I suppose the other barrier is some of the teachers. Because of that peer-to-peer nature, we've really encouraged this open and honest conversation. And some teachers will, I suppose, have a bit of conflict with their sense of duty of care and not want to give the students the space to open up to themselves. Generally, we'll encourage teachers to step out of the room. They're welcome to leave the door open, but just kind of be out of direct eyesight or out of direct earshot even. We might take students down to an oval or under a tree to sit and chat, where hopefully the teachers can still, engage in that duty of care, but leave the students to talk about their experience with alcohol, talk about their experience in sex if they've had it, talk about their experience with drugs and pornography and, mental health, things that I'm sure you can imagine, if you tried to speak to your teacher back when you were a 14, 15-year-old about, the pornography that you were seeing online. Well, what a horrific situation. But, when we come in and have that conversation about what are the differences between pornography and real life, it's a really massive conversation, and it's so critical to learn as a young man that is seeing all this stuff on social media, which may not be able to happen with teachers. So certainly we try and be really honest with the teachers, explain to them why we'd like them to sit out of the session. Sometimes that, unfortunately, doesn't really persuade them. And look, there's exceptions. Some teachers have really good relationships with their students and we get good session outcomes, but for the most part, that is a pretty big challenge, and it tends to detract from the overall quality of the session, I suppose.
Great, excellent, and well done on your well-deserved awards, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.
I'm just mindful of time, but also I know we got Matt there, but I just wanted to go to Thomas. Thomas Saylor is an Aboriginal health worker who works at Mulncurra, which is in Roebourne. Hi, Thomas. He's actually put, would you work with Aboriginal medical services, especially in regional areas, and could these sessions be run on country and not in school or within youth groups, which you've sort of mentioned.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know, are you there, Thomas? Did you want to ask anything else? He might only be able to type.
That's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'd be absolutely open to running sessions anywhere. It's just provided that we have, the demand for the session and permission from whoever owns the property or the school or wherever we're at.
Yeah.
We're happy to travel anywhere, provided that we're in the region and able to get there.
Yeah, because sometimes the Aboriginal medical services in that, like somewhere like Roebourne, have that connection with the school. So maybe working with the AMS, like someone like Thomas, who could gather and the boys together and actually, sort of be the facilitator of the group as well. But bringing you guys in, he'd have the boys. I would imagine that's what you meant, Thomas. So.
And Thomas, if you if you are interested and you have specific AMSs in mind, I'm sure Raglan can pass on my contact details at the end of this. If you want to get in contact with me, I'm more than happy to chat to you about what ideas you might have for this and give you our kind of rural calendar for this year, let you know where we're visiting and see if that will align with anywhere that you have in mind.
Yeah, so Roebourne is in the Pilbara.
Yes,
Yeah.
so we're actually heading to the Pilbara in August.
Oh,
So
that could be perfect.
perhaps if it's kind of on our route, we'd love to come and visit. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Matt, you're on the screen there.
Hey guys, how are we doing? Great presentation, great organisation. Good to see that people are sort of taking initiatives into their own hands to make a change. I was just curious around some of the evaluation that you guys do of the program. I suppose it's one of the sort of tricky spaces that you work in is people are just so different, and the peer experience can be so different. You know, sort of depending on like schools, even in terms of just which suburb they're in, can have very different experiences. As you said, they're their own echo chambers. So yeah, I was just curious about if you guys have any evaluation mechanisms that you use and how you sort of go about using those to sort of justify and explain and evaluate the peer experience.
Is that referring to, Matthew, the kind of like internal evaluation that we're doing, or external evaluation from other bodies?
So either, in terms of if you collect any evaluation from like students after sessions, do you evaluate any of your volunteers? Yeah, sort of anything that you use to try and build a body of evidence, I suppose, to the outcomes that you're able to achieve with schools.
Yeah, sure. Anton could probably talk to the, I suppose, the internal feedback that we get, and then I can talk about, I suppose, our recent moves to get some external validation as well.
Whichever. So I like print off feedback forms, and like I encourage the volunteers to fill them out. But they're very, very important. So yeah, we'll just give them out to students basically. And there's some quantitative feedback, which basically measures like their knowledge of the topics we cover before and then after the session. And then we have like the extent to which they felt the program was important, a rating out of 10, and then we have some space for qualitative feedback. We'll also speak with teachers as well if they have any particular comments regarding their experience of it. We also take that into account. And we've also, last year we had an independent evaluation done by the Department of Communities, I believe, yeah. Yeah, just rather in-depth quantitative and qualitative information in that.
You have to correct me if I'm wrong on the stats here. I think some brief numbers from those internal feedback forms that we give to each student. I think roughly it's like a 95%. I thought this program was awesome kind of thing. It was, you know, in the high 90s of students that feel like their knowledge improved on each single topic that we talked about. We get great qualitative feedback as well, saying, and obviously I'm absolutely going to misquote this because I don't have it in front of me, but words to the effect of, you know, we never get taught this in school. This stuff could save a life. You know, I never knew this before. Thank you for coming in. We very, very rarely get bad feedback. Obviously, you know, you're talking to students and they might think it's funny to give your program a 1. But despite that, I suppose, prevailing culture, we still get students giving us really, really high evaluations after each session. And then in terms of external, I suppose, validation. So yeah, as Anton said, we had the Department of Communities validate us at the end of last year. They ran a big independent evaluation. We're also having all of our content reviewed at the moment by industry professionals. So we've got a child psychologist that also specialises in masculinity, toxic masculinity, reviewing all of our content at the moment. And future plans within the next couple of months to have a UWA gender studies professor review our content. A sister organisation, We Are Women, who do great stuff with the girls, and they do pretty much what we do in female, you know, all the schools with female students. So if you're looking to get involved with the girls as well, We Are Women is a great place to check out. So they're going to be reviewing our content, and they're both health promotion professionals. We've also got plans to have a family and domestic violence specialist look at this, a mental health professional look at this. So yeah, we're really trying to, at the moment, push for some impressive ticks of approval to really say to people, look, this works, and we're really proud of it. And there's potential for a couple of research papers to be published on us as well. That's a little further down the pipeline, but we're hopeful about those as well. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Sounds great. Well, I think we probably, unless there was any more questions, I was just looking at the time, and I think people. So Ashley said, thank you so much.
Thanks very
much. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, we took accepting it at the time.
No, that's all right. Fine, that's great.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, boys, for coming down. And
Thanks for having us.
What we learned here today was very valuable, and the work you guys do is very valuable.
Yeah, we look forward to having more of a yarn. But thanks to everybody that joined us online today, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.